You do not enter medieval Venice by land. You enter it the way Venice entered history itself, across water. You move over the lagoon slowly, and the city seems to rise not from earth, but from light, mist, and memory. Before you see palaces, before you hear bells, before you notice marble or gold, you understand something simpler and stranger. This is a city that should not exist, and yet it does. You are approaching a place born from fear. As Roman order weakened and the mainland grew dangerous, families fled toward these shallow islands, these mud flats and channels, these places that looked less like a future than a refuge. They came because the world behind them was breaking. They stayed because the water gave them one chance to survive. So medieval Venice does not begin in glory. It begins in uncertainty, in wet timber, in boats pulled through reeds and salt on the air, in watchfulness. It begins with people who do not yet know that they are building one of the most remarkable cities in history. As you draw nearer, you are not simply arriving in Venice. You are arriving at a long act of defiance, a city built against invasion, a city built against geography, a city built stubbornly against the ordinary rules of the world. You begin where Venice began, not in the grand square, not beneath domes, but out among the scattered islands where survival came first. Here, the story is quieter. You picture small communities clinging to patches of firmer ground while the lagoon shifts around them, always moving, always reminding them that safety has a price. People arrive in waves carrying what they can save. Some come after raids. Some come after rumors. Some come because they trust shallow water more than open roads. Behind them lie troubled mainland towns. Before them lies a harsh refuge of mud, fish, salt, and wind. You see no Venice yet, only fragments. Torcello, Malamocco, Rialto, islands that do not think of themselves as a single city, only as places to endure the next season, the next storm, the next threat. Men fish, women mend nets. Families cut timber, drive piles, tend boats, gather salt, and learn that every meal, every shelter, every crossing depends on reading the water correctly. The lagoon protects them, but it also tests them. It hides channels and exposes banks. It feeds them, then floods them. It gives warning, but never comfort. To live here, people must cooperate. No household can master this place alone. Paths are watery, boundaries are uncertain. Even distance is measured differently here. That is the first lesson of Venice. Before it becomes rich, it becomes adaptable. Before it becomes proud, it becomes practical. Before it becomes a republic, it becomes a habit of working together. And as you move through this early world of reeds, tide, and timber, you understand that Venice is not born in stone. It is born in improvisation. That is why the city's first monument is not a palace or a church. It is resilience. It is the stubborn decision to remain where others would retreat and to turn a temporary hiding place into the beginning of a civilization all their own. Now, you move closer to the heart of the emerging city, and something changes. The lagoon is still the same lagoon, restless and protective, but the people living within it are no longer only hiding from history. They are beginning to shape it. At first, Venice is a cluster of communities, each with its own loyalties, its own habits, its own fears. But survival in the water creates a new kind of politics. Someone must settle disputes. Someone must organize defense. Someone must speak for the islands when greater powers look toward the lagoon and ask who rules here. So leadership begins to take form. Later tradition places the first Doge in 697, a single figure rising out of scattered settlements. Whether the moment was as clear as legend claims matters less than what it represents. Venice is learning to gather its will into institutions. It is learning to turn necessity into government. But this new authority is fragile. The lagoon has not erased rivalry. Families compete. Settlements distrust one another. Outside forces press close. To the east stands Byzantium, the great empire whose influence reaches across the Adriatic. To the west and north, other powers watch the lagoon with interest. Venice cannot yet afford the luxury of choosing only one world, so it learns a habit that will define it for centuries. It bows without surrendering. It accepts influence without giving away itself. It speaks the language of loyalty while practicing the art of independence. You can feel that balance already as the political center shifts toward Rialto, where the channels are easier to defend and trade is growing more active. What had been a refuge becomes a seat of power. What had been scattered begins, slowly, to gather. This is the age when Venice stops being merely a place where people escaped. It becomes a place where people belong. And that changes everything. Because once a people believe they are one community, however imperfectly, they can build more than shelters. They can build a state. As you continue, the wider world closes in around the lagoon. Venice is no longer only dealing with tides, timber, and the local rivalries. Now, it must survive the ambitions of empires. To one side stands Byzantium, ancient, refined, and far-reaching, still claiming authority over these waters. To another rises the Frankish world, vigorous and expanding, pressing into Italy with imperial confidence. Between them lies Venice, small in territory, uncertain in form, but increasingly aware of its value. That value is strategic. Whoever understands the lagoon understands a gate between worlds. In the early 9th century, pressure becomes direct. Frankish power tests Venice, and the lagoon must prove whether it is truly a shield or merely a delay. Men familiar with roads and fields meet a place governed by tides, channels, and hidden paths. Here, strength alone is not enough. The water chooses its own allies. Venice survives. And in surviving, it learns something decisive. It cannot overpower great empires. It can outlast them, outmaneuver them, and make itself too useful to destroy carelessly. So the city refines its political instinct. It will not be purely Eastern. It will not be purely Western. It will belong fully to neither side and benefit from both. This is the beginning of a distinct Venetian identity, not Roman, though born from Rome's collapse, not Byzantine, though shaped by Byzantine influence, not Frankish, though forced to negotiate with Frankish strength. Something else is emerging here in the lagoon, a society that studies power without worshiping it, that respects empires without dissolving into them, and that survives by remaining slightly out of reach. You see it now in the consolidation around Rialto, in the confidence of the settlements, in the growing sense that Venice is not merely defended by geography. It is being defined by choice, and that choice, made again and again across generations, will turn a vulnerable refuge into one of the most self-aware republics in medieval Europe. You step at last into the space that will become the symbolic heart of Venice. Here, in the shadow of San Marco, the city decides that survival is not enough. It will have dignity. It will have ceremony. It will have a patron saint worthy of its ambitions. In 828, Venetian merchants carried to the lagoon the relics said to be those of St. Mark the Evangelist, taken from Alexandria and hidden beneath layers of pork to discourage inspection. The tale is dramatic, ingenious, and unmistakably Venetian. Piety and calculation move together. Faith arrives with strategy. The effect is enormous. Until now, Venice has been growing in confidence, but it still lacks a sacred image powerful enough to gather the whole community into a single story. St. Mark changes that. His name gives the Republic prestige. His presence gives the city a holy center. His symbol, the winged lion, gives Venice an emblem that can be carried onto ships, carved into stone, raised above markets and harbors, and understood at a glance. You look up at the basilica, and even if the church before you was shaped over centuries, you can already sense what Venice is creating. This is not merely a place of prayer. It is a statement in brick, mosaic, light, and gold. It tells merchants, pilgrims, rivals, and emperors alike that Venice is favored, protected, and chosen. That claim matters. In the medieval world, relics are not ornaments. They are authority. They attract devotion, wealth, traffic, memory, and legitimacy. By making St. Mark its sacred protector, Venice does something brilliant. It gives political ambition a religious face and religious devotion a civic home. From this point on, the city will present itself not only as clever and resilient, but as sanctified. The Lagoon Refuge is becoming a ceremonial republic. The floating settlement is becoming an idea, and as you stand beneath domes that seem to hold both east and west in their glittering curves, you see Venice inventing itself in the most persuasive way possible, by making myth feel like destiny. A city can rule with ships, but first it must rule the imagination of its people. You cross toward Rialto, and the sound of Venice changes. Here, the city does not sing. It bargains. It calls out. It unloads, measures, records, and remembers. If San Marco is where Venice presents its soul, Rialto is where Venice reveals its mind. The canal is crowded. Boats slide in heavy with grain, oil, wine, timber, salt, wax, iron, and cloth. Porters bend beneath loads. Merchants argue over prices. Brokers carry news as valuable as cargo. Scales tip. Ledgers open. Deals begin before dawn and continue until the light thins over the water. You are standing in the real engine of medieval Venice. Here, wealth is not abstract. It has weight. It stains hands. It fills warehouses. It spoils if delayed. It disappears if miscounted. The Republic grows powerful because its people learn to master details. Contracts, credit, partnerships, insurance, timing, convoy schedules, exchange rates, and the dangerous gap between promise and performance. But Rialto is more than commerce. It is a meeting place of worlds. Greek voices mingle with Latin ones. Traders from the Islamic world bring goods, techniques, and information. Sailors arrive sunburned and exhausted. Priests pass clerks. Noble sons learn caution beside seasoned dealers who trust no smile until the figures match. They'll walk a little farther, and you find the daily Venice behind the spectacle. Artisans hammer metal. Bakers work in the heat before sunrise. Fishmongers rinse their tables. Housewives compare prices. Children run errands. Parish bells cut through the noise. The city is not only rich, it is organized. That matters because commerce on this scale cannot survive disorder. Venice depends on trust, and trust must be managed. So rules multiply. Records improve. Officials watch measures in traffic. Reputation becomes a kind of currency. As you stand by the market and breathe the mixed air of salt water, damp aroma, spices, smoking fish, you begin to see why Venice endures. It is not merely lucky, it is disciplined. It turns trade into habit, habit into wealth, and wealth into power. In Venice, business is not a side activity. It is the bloodstream of the Republic. And every crate, signature, rumor, and crossing at Rialto teaches the same lesson. This city rules the sea because it first learned how to rule exchange itself day after day, patiently. You turn toward the arsenal, and Venice reveals another truth about itself. Wealth alone does not keep a republic alive. Cargo must be protected. Routes must be defended. Promises made at Rialto must survive storms, pirates' war, and the greed of rivals. So here, behind guarded entrances and within a world of rope, timber, pitch, iron, and sweat, Venice builds the power to make commerce stick. The arsenal is not just a shipyard. It is discipline made visible. Hulls rise in ordered sequence. Oars are shaped to measure. Sails, cables, nails, spars, and fittings move through workshops that answer not to whim, but to method. Men labor with practiced speed because the Republic understands something rare for the medieval world. Naval strength is not an occasional effort, it is a system. You can almost hear it before you fully see it. Hammer blows, saw teeth, shouted counts, water striking timbered sides, the deep creak of vessels taking form. Everything here suggests preparation. Venice does not wait for danger and then begin building. It builds so that danger will hesitate. That is why the arsenale matters so much. It turns merchants into a protected class, trade routes into defended corridors, and a lagoon city into a maritime state. Here, Venice learns to standardize, to store, to equip, and to launch with astonishing efficiency. In this place, the Republic manufactures power, not with speeches. With ships, you return to San Marco, and the city seems to glitter differently now. The domes still shine. The mosaics still catch the light. The square still opens like a grand stage. But once you know what Venice became in the age of Crusade, you can no longer look at this place as innocence made stone. You are looking at victory, calculation, and theft arranged so beautifully that history almost forgets to blush. In 1202, Crusaders gather, needing ships to carry them east. Venice agrees to transport them, but the enterprise falters. Too few men arrive, too little money is paid. A holy war begins in debt, and debt, in medieval politics, is rarely only financial. It becomes leverage, it becomes direction, it becomes temptation. So the crusade drifts from its declared purpose. First comes Zara, a Christian city attacked by men who had set out to fight for Christendom elsewhere. Then comes the larger prize, Constantinople, the greatest city in the Eastern Christian world, rich, divided, and vulnerable to manipulation from outside and within. Venice understands what stands before it: trade privileges, strategic influence, access, revenge, opportunity on an imperial scale. And in 1204, the Crusaders sacked the city. You should not rush past that sentence. Constantinople is not merely defeated. It is looted, burned, desecrated, and broken open by men wearing the language of faith. Churches are stripped, treasures are seized, sacred spaces are violated. The old capital of Byzantine civilization is turned into spoil. Venice profits enormously. It secures commercial advantages, strategic footholds, and prestiges across the eastern Mediterranean. Relics, artworks, columns, and luxury goods flow westward. The famous bronze horses that later adorned San Marco become part of this story of appropriation. The Republic rises higher because another Christian empire has been brought low. That is why this moment must be told honestly. It is a masterpiece of statecraft and a scandal of conscience at the same time. Venice proves its brilliance here, but also its hardness. Commerce, war, piety, and ambition become almost impossible to separate. As you stand in the Piazzetta and look toward the sea, you understand that medieval Venice has crossed a threshold. It is no longer simply defending itself, trading cleverly, or negotiating between stronger powers. It is shaping the fate of empires. It is taking the wealth of the East and folding it into its own image. The city will remember this as triumph. Others will remember it as betrayal. Though both memories are true. And from this point onward, whenever Venice calls itself serene, wise, and chosen, the stones of San Marco whisper another truth. Greatness has been purchased. You stand before the Doge's palace, and at first it seems to promise the rule of one magnificent man. The columns are elegant. The facade is a theatrical. The setting beside San Marco is almost too perfect. Surely you think, this must be the house of a prince. But Venice mistrusts princes. The Doge is honored, displayed, dressed in ceremony, and surrounded by ritual. Yet the office is carefully confined. He represents the Republic, but he does not own it. He presides, but he is watched. He speaks, but councils answer. In Venice, splendor is allowed precisely because power is divided. That division is the secret of the state. Over time, councils multiply, committees harden, procedures lengthen, and aristocratic government becomes the machine behind the pageant. The Great Council emerges as the central body of noble rule. Other councils narrow decisions further, examine risks, and keep any one family from reaching too far. Venice prefers balance to brilliance, process to impulse, continuity to genius. Then, in 1297, comes the Serrata, the closing of the Great Council, access to the ruling class titans. Office becomes more securely hereditary. The Republic grows more stable, but also less open. Liberty remains, yet it is increasingly the liberty of a recognized elite. That is the bargain. Venice avoids the chaos that shakes so many other cities, but it does so by limiting who may truly govern. It becomes famous for republican order while quietly hardening into oligarchy. As you look at the palace, you see why the building matters so much. It is beautiful, but not carefree, graceful, but not innocent. It announces confidence while hiding anxiety. The Doge looks powerful, but in Venice, power is always being watched. That is how the Republic survives so long. It turns ambition into office, office into procedure, and procedure into habit, until government itself feels like architecture, intricate, balanced, and built to prevent collapse at all costs. Now you move into the quieter chambers behind the spectacle, and another Venice appears. This one does not glitter. It listens, it records, it suspects. The same Republic that celebrates order in public works constantly to prevent disorder in private. That is not paranoia alone. Venice has much to lose. Trade depends on confidence. Government depends on predictability. A rumor can damage credit. A conspiracy can shake fleets, markets, and alliances. So the state learns to watch carefully. Laws regulate cargo, contracts, weights, measures, and behavior. Officials inspect, verify law, and intervene. Justice is meant to be efficient because delay is dangerous in a city where so much depends on movement. Even stone corridors seem to carry this lesson. Footsteps echo, doors close, Water slides below dark arches, silent and patient. Here, freedom exists within boundaries drawn by the state. And those boundaries matter. Venice understands that beauty alone does not preserve a republic, control does. You walk now through a quieter Venice, and the city feels changed. The market still exists. The bells still ring, boats still cross the canals. But in 1348, plague enters the lagoon, and suddenly every familiar sound seems to come from farther away. At first, disease is rumor carried by trade, another danger traveling the same routes that once brought profit and prestige. Then it becomes visible. Houses close, families vanish from windows, priests move from bedside to bedside. Neighbors begin to fear one another. The republic that could calculate ships, contracts, and convoys cannot bargain with death. You must imagine the shock. Venice had built its greatness on connection. Now connection becomes peril. Every arrival may carry infection. Every crowded parish, every shared boat, every market exchange becomes a thread in a tightening net. The city that lived by movement discovers how movement can kill. Loss changes everything. Labor grows scarce. Wages shift. Piety deepens. Charity is tested. Memory hardens. Some pray more fervently, some despair, some simply endure one day after another, measuring survival in emptied streets and familiar names no longer spoken aloud. And yet, Venice does not disappear. That is part of its medieval character, too. It absorbs catastrophe and turns even suffering into administration, response, adjustment, and habit. The Republic learned slowly and imperfectly that public health is also a matter of statecraft. Trade has made Venice vulnerable, but organization helps it recover. So as you stand beside a quiet canal at dusk, you see a truth wealth had once concealed. Venice is powerful, yes, but never invulnerable. The ships do not bring only spices. They bring silence, fear, prayer, and the knowledge that every republic, however brilliant, remains mortal. Yet when morning returns, the bells ring again, the boats move, and Venice begins the slow work of living after devastation. Because endurance is also one of the city's oldest arts, learned from water itself. You look out across the lagoon, and for a moment, Venice feels exposed. All its habits of confidence, all its polished rituals, all its claims to order and destiny are now tested by a brutal fact. Another maritime republic wants the same sea, the same routes, the same prophets, and the same future. That rival is Genoa. For generations, the two powers circle one another across the Mediterranean. Suspicious, competitive, and often violent, their merchants meet in distant ports. Their fleets measure one another. Their ambitions sharpen in parallel. By the late 14th century, rivalry becomes open crisis in the War of Chioggia. Then danger comes terrifyingly close. The Genoese take Chioggia in 1379, and suddenly the enemy is not somewhere far off in rumor or report. The enemy is at the edge of the lagoon itself. Venice can imagine its own end. Panic spreads. The republic that once seemed almost invincible now faces humiliation, strangulation, perhaps destruction. But this is the kind of moment Venice understands best. The state mobilizes. The arsenal works. Leaders steady the city. Resources are gathered. Resolve hardens. Venetians fight not for expansion now, but for existence. And because survival is the oldest lesson the lagoon ever taught them, they do not break. They close in, recover momentum, and force the crisis to turn. When Venice emerges from the war, It is not untouched. It is something more interesting. It is confirmed. The Republic has looked directly at catastrophe and remained standing. That memory matters. It becomes part of Venetian identity, part of the city's deep conviction that discipline can rescue what fear declares lost. And as you wire the water darken under the evening light, you understand why Chioggia was more than a war. It was a verdict. Venice still lived. You turn from the open water and look toward the mainland. Then the old logic of Venice begins to change. For centuries, the Republic had trusted the sea, the lagoon, and distant commerce. Now it starts to think more seriously about fields, roads, rivers, and fortified towns beyond the water. This is not a betrayal of Venetian identity. It is an adjustment to danger. Mainland powers are growing stronger. Supply matters more. Grain matters more. Safe approaches matter more. A city that lives by trade cannot ignore the territory that feeds it, connects it, and threatens it. So in the later Middle Ages, Venice expands onto the terra firma. The Maritime Republic becomes something larger and more complex, a state with ships on the sea and interests deep inland. This gives Venice strategic depth, greater security, and firmer control over the routes linking the lagoon to northern Italy. Yet the shift carries a quiet irony. The city born from escape into water now reaches back toward the land it once used mainly as a hinterland and a source of danger. You can feel the significance of that turn. Venice is still Venice, but it is no longer only a lagoon republic. It is preparing, almost without saying so, for a different age already, taking shape on the mainland as well. You return to the spaces where Venice likes to be seen, and now the city seems fully aware of itself. It is no longer merely surviving, no longer merely trading, no longer merely defending its place between empires. By the late Middle Ages, Venice has become a performance of permanence. Look around you. Stone meets water with improbable grace. Palaces rise along the Grand Canal like statements of inherited confidence. San Marco gleams with the memory of distant worlds brought home and made Venetian. Processions move through public space with careful splendor. Banners lift, bells answer. Officials appear in ceremony that does not simply decorate authority, but explains it. Venice wants to be admired, and more than admired, believed. It wants visitors, rivals, ambassadors, merchants, and subjects to feel that this republic is not temporary, not fragile, not accidental. Beauty becomes political language. Order becomes spectacle. Wealth becomes architecture. That is why the late medieval city matters so much. It gathers centuries of adaptation into one visible claim. The Lagoon Refuge has become a capital of ritual. The Merchants' Republic has become a theater of state. Even memory is arranged here, placed in stone and mosaic, so that the city seems older, wiser, and more inevitable than any single generation could ever be. And as you stand among facades that seem to float and endure at once, you understand the final medieval achievement of Venice. It has turned history into atmosphere. It has learned how to make power look serene. You slow your pace as evening settles over the lagoon, because medieval Venice does not end with collapse. It ends with a threshold. By 1492, the Republic is still wealthy, still disciplined, still formidable, still certain that its habits of caution, display, and adaptation will carry it through whatever comes next. And yet the horizon is changing. The eastern Mediterranean remains vital, but Ottoman power presses hard upon the old balance. The roots that enriched Venice are still active, but they no longer feel untouchable. Beyond the familiar world, Atlantic horizons are beginning to matter more, and the center of gravity in European commerce will not remain forever. Where medieval Venice first founded, you can sense that the city understands this, even if it does not say so openly. Venice has always preferred adjustment to confession. It changes while pretending only to continue. That has been its genius from the beginning. So this is where the medieval story closes, not in failure, not in triumph alone, but in suspension. The city of refuge has become a republic of ceremonies, trade, law, memory, and power. It has survived invasion, rivalry, plague, and war. It has sanctified itself, enriched itself, disciplined itself, and made its improbable existence seem almost natural. Now, the light fades across domes, roofs, chimneys, and darkening water. Bells travel over the lagoon, oars dip softly in the last color of day, and you understand at last that medieval Venice was never built on water alone. It was built on patience, invention, vigilance, ambition, and the stubborn refusal to sink. The Middle Ages end. Venice remains.